Alright, good morning. How are we all doing today? It is Sunday, August 21st, 2022. This is the first time I've actually been able to make a video in a while. Couldn't really do so last Wednesday because my boss made me go to work that day, unfortunately. So, here's my opportunity. So I figured, since this is my first day off from work that I've had since 2.5 weeks ago, I wanted to check out a new site that I hadn't been to until today. Right now I'm actually down in Estero, which is basically a town that's just south of Fort Myers. Specifically, I'm actually visiting what is known as the Koreshan Settlement State Park. Now, before I, explain what it is that's around me, I need to go over briefly about the history of this place. So, first and foremost, the Koreshan community was formed under a person named Dr. Cyrus Teed. Now, his name, Cyrus, when you translate it into Hebrew, it translated into Koresh. Now, let's just say he was a very devout individual, religiously speaking. He was in Christianity. But he had a different approach, though. As opposed to being a complete minister, as his family was honestly expecting him to, he instead went more into the medical field. Fascinating enough. So he actually was a doctor, hence Dr. Cyrus Teed. Now, apparently, well, I'll get into that shortly, but he originally grew up in New York State. This was way back in the mid-1800s, right? So he even lived during the Civil War. And so, basically with his medical practice, he noticed that a lot of the medical care that did occur during the Civil War, he didn't fully agree with. So he kind of wanted to start forming some of his own ideas. So, apparently, as he was approaching into his, around my age, so in his mid-20s or so, he actually then settled to Chicago, and he lived there for a time. And apparently he had this illumination to basically form a new community slash a kind of like a religio-scientific movement, in a sense. Almost like Scientology, but still a bit different. He decided to call this type of community called the Koreshans. And so, essentially, it was... I'm trying to think of like a good example of Koreshan, like another example of something similar to Koreshans. Give me a second. Okay, I had to refresh myself for a second. So another great example of a particular movement that had a similar formation were the Mormons, right? Based out of Utah. So kind of like the same origin, so to speak, very similar. So essentially it formed in Chicago, and at the time there was a lot of religious debate back then. I mean, honestly, it still happens to this day. But he decided to leave Chicago and then head down to what is now Estero, Florida. And you figure back then, this was in 1894. You figure back then, this part of Florida was a lot quieter, a lot more what you call agrarian too. So essentially during this time, he moved here with what is now known as his home group. There were at least up to 200 to 300 different followers that he had. And he had a certain way of his speech that was able to convince him to get new followers. I mean, some people would probably say it was kind of like a cult. But there's really no discussion of that from what I've read so far. But it could be interpreted that way. Needless to say, he picked here to have his settlement, which is now known as the Koreshan Unity Settlement. And essentially, he envisioned this place to be known as the New Jerusalem. So he wanted to have basically like a central temple. He wanted to have gardens, cottages, dining halls, art halls, even like river expresses. I think I already said gardens. So he essentially envisioned in creating a newer version of Jerusalem, according to the Bible. And he also, in a sense, wanted to create a new Garden of Eden. But essentially, the Koreshans, they followed their own way of life. Those who were members of the particular religious community, they lived very celibate lives. And to be honest too, back then, privacy seemed to be harder to obtain. Because, for instance, I want to show you guys this. The yellow building right there, that's known as the Planetary Court building. There were 7 women who lived in that home. And the Planetary Court was essentially it was like their courthouse. That's basically where the council lived. But, when I briefly went in that building, there are no doors whatsoever that go to the bedrooms. Because I believe, they had a belief that for spaces that had doors, they believed something like it was a violation of space. So, you could say, like, some of their beliefs were very, what you call, quirky. I can't really think of a better word to sum that up. But, yeah, like, even just the settlement itself was following a very geometric pattern. And it was supposed to be sacred. And that's not even one of their beliefs yet, that I haven't even mentioned. I'll have to talk about that in my next video. But either way, some of you may be wondering, like, does the Koreshan community still exist? Perhaps it does. Perhaps it doesn't. But definitely not to the extent that it used to. And honestly, one of the biggest confusions, for the Koreshan community was, Dr. Cyrus Teed, he believed in the celibacy, but yet he wanted up to 10 million people to live here. Doesn't make much sense. So yeah. I'm gonna have to break this up into a second video, just because, there's a bit more to discuss, but it's quite neat. I've never been to a place like this. It's a state park, but it focuses more upon cultural history. So it's really neat. And the only way that I even found out about this place was when I was doing my Peace River narrations. One of the guests asked me if I ever been here, and I haven't. So You know, it's like, you know what? I'm gonna have a day off soon. We're gonna make our way out here. So, alright, you guys, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for any more of my upcoming videos. Take care, you guys. Journey on a Journey is outwards. Take care, folks. See ya.